Hello, welcome to 8.9 News. I'm Finlo Costain. An assessment commissioned by Welsh Government examining the impact of its proposed sustainable farming scheme forecasts a 10.8% reduction in livestock numbers across Welsh agriculture. NFU Cymru has called this a shocking scenario. I spoke to Jon Parker, Director for Wales at the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission. I asked him whether he agrees.
I think where we are at the moment in the third consultation and the final consultation, there are still some key elements missing in terms of we understand what the headline budget is that's been put forward by the minister and been ring-fenced and retained, but we're still unclear with regard to payment rates, which provides a bit of a difficulty around some of the debate that can be had. And I think when we look at it in the round, we have to ask ourselves, is the budget sufficient to deliver a meaningful scheme? Are the payment rates going to provide parity with our neighbours in England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and indeed Ireland, for similar or comparative actions that are being delivered through the scheme? And I think there are some real sticking points, as I'm sure everyone has picked up, around the tree debate and the requirement for tree planting within the scheme alongside the habitat element.
Just outline that tree debate for me, would you?
The tree planting element is centred around farms that sign into SFS need to have 10% of their land area given over to tree planting, and another 10% habitat, which I understand can be within the tree planted area. So for farmers, I see particularly on the dairy side, that provides some difficulty in terms of moving over into that 10% tree planting, and the debates that have existed around hedges and edges as part of that, alongside how this will be delivered in the long term against other Welsh Government objectives, such as the National Forest. How does it, how does this all link up really in terms of broader government policy? So the latest sort of pressure points around that in terms of political debate has been around the devaluation of land and questions around devaluation through tree planting.
Just a couple of follow-up questions. Thinking about that potential reduction in livestock numbers of around 11%, would that be such a disaster if it reduced input use and associated costs? And then are there opportunities for Welsh farmers to access natural capital markets to help to make up the funding shortfall?
If we look at the ADAS model figures first, then yeah, okay, 122,000 units, and I think it's 10.8% or thereabouts reduction across what they've modelled as dairy and specialist sheep units. So I think if you take those figures in the round against sort of headage that's there at the moment, and we look at some of the broader implications that has on the rural economy as a whole, I think that's where some concern is developed within the farming unions, and how the impact effectively spreads via the multiplier into the ancillary sectors that support agriculture, particularly on the dairy side, I feel. So to come to your question with regard to how that impacts things like inputs, then yes, there will be, you can foresee an impact on input if you're taking land out, in terms of potentially synthetic fert and other inputs. Again, it is really a question of yes, we understand the modelling that has been put forward with the scheme, but it is the wider implications for what that looks like for the fabric of the rural economy in Wales, when if you take Welsh Government's figures, 90% of the land in Wales is farmed. So while we accept that it does constitute a small contribution to GDP, it does underpin the fabric of an extremely large area of Wales outside of our old coalfield areas, Cardiff, Newport, Swansea, Bangor in North Wales. So those are the sort of broader questions we have around rural development and the socio-economic fabric of rural Wales with the implications of the scheme.
And the opportunities around natural capital?
Yeah, this is a core area for me in Food Farming and Countryside Commission per se. In some areas, Wales is underdeveloped. So this week in the Senedd, in Welsh Parliament, there was a statement from our Climate Change Minister over the creation of the body that's going to undertake governance in terms of biodiversity moving forward. We're really behind the curve on this. England is far ahead, so Scotland. We've got some catching up to do on this. And in terms of biodiversity being part of what you might call a triad of natural capital in terms of carbon and soil, in terms of water quality, nutrient inputs, in terms of biodiversity net gain, I'm not seeing what I would like to be the level of sort of cross-fertilization or discussion going on between SFS and what the natural capital markets can offer, and where the fairness is in that for farmers to engage. So that's one area that I'm working quite hard on with stakeholders to try and build some discussion, some frameworks and some consensus around how we can fairly utilise natural capital markets.
Jon, how does the new sustainable farming scheme fit alongside other food and drink policies in Wales and also responsibilities under the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act?
Handily enough, ffinlo, in my farm shed, I've got a library of previous policies stretching back to 1999, including this very old, dusty Farming for the Future, which was the very first consultation document for the future of farming in Wales. And funnily enough, when I look at it, it asks the questions in the very short sort of consultation response at the end, the core questions around Welsh agriculture and land use must become more sustainable environmentally and ecologically. Extreme changes in the structure of family farms must be guarded against. So this is the National Assembly for Wales's own document. 25 years later, we are still asking the same questions. So we have to ask ourselves, 25 years on since the creation of Welsh Government, with, I would add, constitutionally, one of a handful of countries in the world that has sustainable development as its constitutional cornerstone, have we really evolved from the questions that we've asked in this document in terms of our food policy? So, you could say, no, we've remained stagnant because we're still asking the same questions of how we transition. And to come on to where we are now in terms of the holistic food policy that we have quite divergent pre and post farm gate policies, where for the last 10 years, we've had a post farm gate food and drink policy direction that is focused on growth. And what I mean by that is the targets and the outputs have been purely focused on sales growth from 5 billion to 7 billion, and now from 7 billion to 8.5 billion. Pre-farm gate, we now have a situation which we've known, in fairness, for some time, is looking towards compressing the sector. How that looks in terms of what that means in what flavour of sustainable farming you might want to have in Wales, whether it's an agroecological transition for the whole food system, regenerative as part of that, organic or sustainable intensification, all of these different flavours of what sustainable agriculture might look like. We do have quite divergent policies existing within the food system space. And if we think about the fact that, in Wales, we are not isolated in the food system, we exist in a global food system. Our largest red meat processors are all foreign owned in Wales. So the impacts of the global food system and how that's changing also have impacts on our post-farm gate sector quite considerably in Wales, in terms of what we might see as consolidation moving forward.
Now, clearly there's been some disquiet, but attitudes to the details of the sustainable farming scheme notwithstanding, how do you think the Welsh Government has handled the policy development and consultation process? Because it seems to me to have squandered quite a lot of goodwill, even among farmers already trying to farm agroecologically.
Yeah, I think in terms of how the consultation has progressed, Welsh Government have undertaken some good engagement. They've run quite a number of events all over Wales. They're going on at the moment. The Minister has wanted to co-design and co-produce this policy. I think there is a feeling that with those sentiments of co-designing and co-producing, then really speaking, the decisions with regard to what the final decisions on what the scheme will look like will be taken by the Minister through her civil servants. So for me, there are some questions about how we are proactive in terms of farmer input into the scheme going forward. We're moving through a sustainable farming scheme through continued delinking of agricultural payments. So this is just a continued step. And the difficulty for government and for Welsh Government is that farmland is privately owned, it's a private resource, it produces food for our citizens. And I think that through the consultation needs to continue moving through into what you might call a co-managed approach to agricultural policy. I think that would go some way to delivering some consensus in the middle, away from these polarized debates that we're having at the moment over tree planting, over what the food system can deliver in Wales for climate change, for nature, and for the provision of healthy food for our citizens. Moving forward and how Welsh Government engages with the sector, I think is going to be really important in how policy develops over the coming years. And I think FFCC have tried to play a role in that as a convener in this space. And if we look across to marine management, then co-management is the go-to tool in ecosystem focused fisheries management regimes. And personally, I would like to see Welsh Government really being creative and innovative in this space and really thinking about how they can change their engagement with our farming communities in rural Wales in that area.
That was Jon Parker from the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission. More news on our website, 8.9.com. That's all for now. We're back soon. Thanks for watching.